Okay. Hello, Kingsley. I'm very glad that you made it back to Baden-Baden this year. And I'm really looking forward to your talk tomorrow. Just for those people who don't know you, maybe you can give a short introduction about your background, what your research is all about, and your books, and which topic you're going to talk about tomorrow.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Rainer. And thanks again for inviting me back to speak at this medical conference. My background generally is a social background because I worked in sociology. And I tend to look at social themes and social trends also from a point of view of human thinking patterns, the way consciousness works, and also technology and different trends. What I tend to look at recently is how our sense of reality is formed, and therefore through narratives, and what are the consensus narratives and how they are formed in society. And so, like last year in the conference, I talked about the psychology of our thinking and how it's been undergoing certain aberrations because of certain trends. This year, you asked me to look at a kind of technology because my latest work in my book, The Inversion, how we're being perceived by a false reality. So I'm looking at how a certain narrative, a story around technology is being offered to us, and how this narrative may be presented only by a small section of society, but it's been promoted as being a grand narrative, maybe a narrative which is going to take humanity forward into the next stage of evolution. So I'm bringing in the theme of evolution, which your group talks about, but look from a technological point of view and how it may be trying to steer away from the story or the narrative of biological evolution. So really it's a story about two stories, biological evolution and technological evolution.
Okay, we know that biological evolution takes a very long time to make major shifts or adaptations in our bodies and our metabolism, for example. While the technological evolution could be considered part of our cultural evolution, which can be very rapid, and actually it is very rapid right now. And what are the particular dangers that you see concerning our cultural, or more specifically our technological evolution, for example, with respect to the effects that it has on our bodies or our health?
Well, that's a critical question, because biological evolution, it's impacted by many different varied factors and external to us that often we don't have control over. We adapt to them, or we're in a contextual environment. Now, technological evolution, the people who are driving this narrative, they very specifically say it's a human-driven narrative. They are driving the narrative of technical evolution. So you see, it's how they see themselves, how they see the world, goes into their idea of the narrative. And they very clearly state, well, we've had millions of years of evolution that's developed the mind and the body, but we are going to give you a new stage of evolution within 3 generations of robotics, or 3 generations of the Techno-Evolution. So they're very clearly putting on another narrative. But of course, what they're also trying to promote is a change in our environment. And a change in our environment, which they're saying is less amenable to a pure biological body. If the environment is changing with more technological infrastructure and the techno-ecosystem, the human body, in order to adapt to that, must merge or come closer in collaboration with technology. So what they're trying to say is that because our technological environment is changing, which humans are behind, our body therefore must also be adapted to the technological environment. So it's human-driven, which there's a danger there of many problems, and hubris is one of them.
Yeah, basically it's the opposite of what we and other physicians and speakers at this conference promote. In fact, the opposite would be we live in a more and more artificial environment, a technological environment, but our bodies are still the Stone Age bodies. And so instead of saying we have to adapt by by merging with the technology. The other side would be we try to use technology wisely, but not overdo it, and consciously choose to reduce technology whenever possible and get more and more connected to nature again. This would be the other approach, which is of course not the main narrative.
No, I mean, it's not the main narrative come from the technological side. Of course, technology is inevitable and it's beneficial.
Yeah.
We collaborate, and technology is very important for humanity. You know, I think in a certain stage of evolution in any civilization, you come to a point where you come into contact with the potential for advanced technologies. But these narratives of techno-evolution, which is being pushed by a certain percentage of the technologists, they are coming out with a new narrative saying, well, the human body is weak. As a pure biological body, it's weak and it's not adaptable for the future where we're going to. And also what they're bringing in is quite interesting. They're bringing in a kind of quasi-spirituality, which I'll talk about in my talk, is that they're also trying to co-opt the idea, well, if we go through a technical evolution, we're also going closer towards a new spirituality. By doing that, they're closing down a physical, biological spirituality. So, for example, the human body, it may have been the same physical body biologically for, as you say, from the Stone Age, but there's many other capacities that come through the biological body. There's many other psychic and perceptual capacities that we can develop. But this tech narrative is saying, well, no, the body's finished. So it's kind of saying there's no more perceptual psychic growth. Mm. And so they're saying, well, therefore, the next stage has to be through a technological quasi kind of transcendence or transhumanism. So there's a co-opting of the narrative to take it away. And I think that's dangerous because they're creating a polarity. It's either the tech future, which you have to adapt to, or you're in a kind of weak body future. And creating that polarization is a false narrative, a false polarity, which is problematic. And that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah. It's not an either or, but it's this and that as well. Right?
Yeah. It's always a harmonious, collaboration between our environment and our technologies and our body and our physiology and everything, because we're living in a kind of integrated context. Mm. But what the tech narrative is saying is that they're trying to hijack the context also and saying it's more polarized. It isn't either or. Well, I mean, it's either or, but it's not kind of integrated. And I think, as I'm saying in my talk tomorrow, this may be also indicative of the way their mind is thinking. And so I think that's what I'm presenting tomorrow.
Okay, then two final questions. First one, who are they who present us these narratives, these false narratives that convert or pervert our perception of reality? Mm-hmm. And the second one is, do you think that humanity as a whole is now ready for a new spiritual shift if we choose the right direction, if we don't get overwhelmed by technology, but start to develop our own intrinsic capacities to receive, for example, frequencies and so on from outside?
I think the second question is fundamentally more important because it concerns a whole human race. But I'll answer the first question about who are they. Generally, it's a kind of cult of technologists, and we know that there's tech giants and there's people we know certain figures, whether it's Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos or Google and these people. There's a kind of, you could call it a cabal of technologists because they're highly embedded in a financial economic tech future. Mm. They talk about bioeconomics or what I call biocapitalism. And so they're heavily, and also they're very much, they have a very high profile platform because they're kind of tech industrialists who own a lot of the media, high profile media. And so it's actually a small group of people, demographically speaking, but because they have the exposure and the platforms and the finances, they're pushing a narrative which seems much more universal, but actually it's not. So I think we're talking much more about a tech narrative which has a very powerful economic base to it, because obviously there's an economics in this tech future. So these are the people that I talk about presenting this narrative, and some of them are are quite clearly transhumanists. So you could say it goes into a kind of technocratic kind of pathway. And yes, they have a danger because they're also talking about quasi-spirituality in their tech narrative. But I think because we're coming to a threshold in our societies, a lot of things are coming together. We're going through many changes across the world. Our cultures are shifting. There's a lot of contextual crises impacts on human right now. And we can feel that. There's a lot of discomfort in the world. And when we come to that point, we are more vulnerable to kind of making transitions. When society is stable, it's more difficult to make grand changes. And that's why society is stable for a long time, and then you get to these crisis points. We're in a crisis point where there's going to be changes, and therefore we're more vulnerable to the impacts. And so if we choose an incorrect narrative now, like a tech narrative, we may miss the point that the next evolution, most likely what we need is a psychic evolution, an evolution in our capacities, our inner capacities, our perceptual abilities, our ability for the body to receive, as you said, finer frequencies of vibrations and understandings. And so with the body is a site for receiving external impacts, for inner evolution and what we may call a spiritual path. But if the body gets taken away by a different narrative, saying the body is weak and we have to merge with technology, then we're actually negating the possibility of more evolution through the biological body in an inner pathway. And that's very important.
Okay. Okay. Actually, a third question emerges. Do you think that these elites that you mentioned purposely try to interfere with our ability to perceive, for example, those vibrations and frequencies? For example, by modifying our DNA with modern vaccines, for example.
It does. If you look at the evidence, it does seem that there's been an intervention deliberately in our social cultural environment and the impacts we receive. In fact, recently there was a Solarity report. Catherine Austin Fix in America runs a Solarity report, and her report recently was called The Great Poisoning. And if you look at our environment, you could say, well, parts of the environments have been poisoned. We have poisoning of our food situations, lots of highly manufactured food. In fact, there was a study that she mentioned that they did a study of a large range of people, and they tested their urine, and 80% of people's urine had herbicide in the urine, like glyphosate. And the studies are not sure yet, but some studies say it could be carcinogenic. So there's a kind of poisoning in a lot of our food. Not only food, but of course, everything we intake is food, whether it's through the media, through the images, through the films, through the music, through the propaganda. That's food that we intake.
Electromagnetic waves?
Yeah, also. I mean, the electromagnetic environment has gone up thousands-fold with all the toxic pollution. And that's been talked about the last 20 years or so, about the electromagnetic pollution toxicity, the forever chemicals in our soil, the mercury in the soil and all the toxicity. So the environment looks like it's trying to kind of hold back another way of evolution through the human being. So on one side, it may look negative because there's been so much targeting of the human's environment and what we receive. On the other side, I think it's a positive sign, because why is so much effort being taken to hold back the evolution of the human being? Is because I feel like something is coming and we are evolving, therefore these forces may be more desperate to hold back human evolution. It's all about control for these people, really.
Okay. So thank you very much. I'm looking forward to your talk, and I can highly recommend your books for everyone who wants to read about evolution in a much broader context, and also not only from the physical, biological side, but more from the consciousness side of evolution. I can highly recommend your books.
Thanks, Rainer.
Yeah, thanks. Cheers.